Rolling cameras and audio. Ready when y'all are.
When the planning for the Texas Heist began, we were going to show the problem of conservatives' priorities and reforms being thwarted by Democrats with the approval of Republicans in the Texas legislature. We were going to talk about the consequences of Democrats being given chairmanships over committees, often committees that oversaw significant GOP priorities or other conservative reforms. But just before we began conducting interviews, something happened. The Democrat-controlled Republican House Speaker and his colleagues rushed out an impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton.
I'm confident that you cannot tolerate, let alone defend, these most serious and grave official wrongs. Members, I respectfully ask that you approve these articles. Send this to trial.
Required by the Constitution, the clerk ring the bell. Should the Speaker voting aye?
What we were told again and again is that this was the price the Democrats demanded of their support for Dade Phelan as Speaker. It was a price Dade Phelan and the Republicans who helped him enable those Democrats were all willing to pay. The case was flimsy, but that didn't seem to matter to Republicans in the Texas House. They were serving the Democrats, and truth was an easy casualty.
You're all familiar with the term hearsay, but what you have in this case is triple hearsay in most cases. It is hearsay within hearsay within hearsay.
We profiled the Republicans most eager to help Dade Phelan. One of our interviewees called them the Dirty Dozen. But in putting together the Texas Heist, there were rumblings. We started realizing that there was more to the story than just a corrupt culture that drew some wayward Republicans into enabling Democrats. More on that coming up. So consider this an addendum to the Texas Heist. And something a little extra. Shortly after the Texas Heist went live, the impeachment trial of Attorney General Ken Paxton began in the Senate. There, the case was exposed as flimsy at best and dishonest at worst. The centerpiece of the House impeachment was that Paxton had been bribed with a remodeled kitchen. The people making the allegations had to admit, under oath for the first time, that no such thing had happened. Paxton was exonerated by the Senate on every count.
You're the most aggressive legal opponent of the Biden administration in the United States. Take away your job, they take away your money.
And they took away my ability, ultimately, to even speak.
Well, that doesn't really sound like the way democracy is supposed to work. How can you be removed from your job without being convicted of something? It feels like Texas is going to be a Democratic state pretty soon.
I think that's the goal. We lose Texas, we lose everything.
He remains the Attorney General to this day. Now, the same can't be said for the Dirty Dozen or other allies of Dade Phelan. In all, the March 2024 GOP primary was unprecedented. 9 incumbents, all of them from the Phelan wing of the GOP, lost outright, and 9 more were shoved into runoffs. But let's look specifically at the Dirty Dozen. There are 13 politicians on that screen, Speaker Phelan and 12 of his closest enablers. Ahead of the primary, 2 chose not to seek re-election, Craig Goldman and Andrew Murr. Significantly, Murr was actively seeking re-election until a poll was paid for in his district showing how badly he'd lose. He left the race, and a friend of his ran instead. That friend lost to Murr's challenger, West Ferdell. So going into the primary, it became the Dirty 10. The voters spoke loudly. 2 of them were defeated outright, Glenn Rogers and J.C. Jatan. Of the remaining 8, there were 3 forced into runoff elections: Justin Holland, Stephanie Click, and Lynn Stuckey. It should be noted that runoff elections aren't kind to incumbents. Luke Macias explained that on election night.
An important statistic for our viewers to know is that 83% of the time that an incumbent goes to a runoff over the last 30 years, they've lost that runoff.
Yeah.
And so understand that if you're an incumbent, if you're an Austin insider, you see an incumbent go to a runoff, odds are that guy's not coming back.
which makes the final result of March 4th all the more historic. Dade Phelan himself was pushed into a runoff, coming in second place in his home district. So, of the dirty dozen, only 5 are certain to remain in the House. Any of those in runoffs who buck the odds that Luke Macias mentioned, well, they come back weakened, and some might argue irrelevant politically. The issue that drove the Texas Heist was the practice of Republicans appointing Democrats to chair legislative committees. Roundly opposed by Republican voters, and now with these losses, even Dade Phelan's own committee chairs agree the practice is dead. For example, J.M. Lozano is a Republican who Dade Phelan appointed to chair the Urban Affairs Committee. He was first elected to the House as a Democrat before switching parties a decade ago. In a recent commentary, he wrote that the practice must be considered dead after the primary results. The first House member to announce a challenge to Phelan for the speakership was Cypress Republican Tom Oliverson. In his announcement, he took the issue head on.
Yes, under my speakership, there would be no Democratic chairs in the House, and let me expound upon that briefly. It is dysfunctional. I myself, in the 2 terms that Dade Phelan has been Speaker, have experienced in both sessions my legislation being killed by a Democrat chair.
But there are forces in Texas who want the practice to continue, and they're spending big money in the runoff to make sure the heist continues, even despite the election results. While putting together the Texas Heist, and since then, a lot of people have talked to us on and off the record. They've alluded to the money driving the behavior of Republican legislators to betray conservative priorities and principles. We wanted to learn more. We wanted names. We talked to a lot of people, many who were scared to go on the record out of fear for their political goals, their professional careers, even their personal well-being.
I didn't know my money was going to be used to attack conservatives. When told us it was pro-business, I really didn't know that meant being the anti-conservative.
But some people were willing to talk. What they had to say will be hard for some of us to hear, but it needs to be exposed. There are people in Texas right now who, in their hubris, want to be kingmakers, and they really don't care what the voters have to say about it.
There is a cabal of people who are intent on ensuring that the grassroots are disempowered at a state level. They're intent upon it, and in fact, their political preservation depends upon it.
First question they ask, what do you think about Democrat chairs?
It is interesting the amount of power that a single organization can have, that they don't even have to make a public statement. They don't have to come out and publicly say or put out any statements against something. Those legislators knew, that staff knew, people knew in the Capitol, no, this doesn't happen because this organization doesn't want it to happen.
They're very good at not having fingerprints.
They think because of their power, their money, and their connections that they have the ability to control everything.
A group that fights against conservatives' interests in the legislature and at the ballot box. A group connected to some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in Texas. They aren't done trying to steal Texas from the citizens. We'll be exposing them and their actions. We'll be posing the questions that need to be asked.